Okay, so in this video, I'm just going to be doing a bunch of talking. And specifically, I'm going to be pointing out some differences between progressive and conservative thinking. And, I think these things might be obvious to some people, but I think there's a lot of people to who this is not obvious. So that's why I kind of want to bring it up. And no, this is not like a comprehensive list of the differences between progressives and conservatives. This is just in a certain framed in a certain manner, but hopefully it'll make sense. So I was speaking to a friend recently, and I am mostly politically progressive. Not 100%. There's some deviations, but for the most part, I'm very much progressive. My friend, I wouldn't say I can't like define him. I wouldn't necessarily put him into any category. I wouldn't say he's necessarily conservative, but he's certainly much more willing to dive into the things that conservatives do and sort of explain why there's good and value and why it makes sense to him. So at least he's much more willing to lean conservative than I am, is the impression I get. So I was speaking to him, and we were discussing, recent politics stuff because with this current administration, with Trump and everything, it's just never-ending turmoil and chaos in the news. It's always something crazy happening, something crazy being said or done. That's just how we know it's going to be. It was like that for 4 years, 5 years if you count when he was running and the election year, before he was elected. So we already know what we were getting into. So we got 3.5 more years of that. But I digress. So we were discussing that stuff, and we were talking about stuff like the Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, and how they were basically making giant cuts all over the place to save money. And he says something like, and I'm going to be paraphrasing because this was a while ago, but it's going to get the gist across. So he says something like, man, we're spending all this money overseas. There's a bunch of wasteful spending in other places. Meanwhile, we have all these problems at home. We got all these homeless people. We got veterans that aren't being properly taken care of. There's problems with the medical system, etc. And so let's just pause right there. So when he is saying this stuff, he is arguing at least somewhat on behalf of the conservative side. So what's wrong with his statement? I'm going to give you a second. What is wrong with what he said? Okay. The answer is, so what he said is real. Yes, we do have a bunch of problems and things that need to be, domestically handled and improved. But conservatives would not use the money like that. You know who would? Progressives would. That's right. So, I mean, just imagine it like this. Oh, we're going to stop spending on some international aid, and we're going to go and we're going to spend it to combat, homelessness issues. Do you see Republicans doing that ever, like realistically? No, of course not. That's never going to happen. So then, the follow-up question, what would conservatives use that money for? Okay, I'll give you a second. What do you think? Okay, so that's a trick question because they wouldn't, because that money wouldn't be there under their control in the first place. Because the implication, even if it's not directly spoken, is that there would simply be less taxes, that the citizenry would be taxed less, so the government just would not have that money, because right now they feel like they're getting a bunch of money and it is being misused. So this is kind of the main point of this video, is to sort of explain how I see the differences between progressives and conservatives, at least with regard to money and fiscal stuff. So, and I'll start with conservatives because we're already talking about this here, but conservatives feel like, it's the common thing that they've always ran on, they've always done, is less taxes, like take less money from the people and you're going to have less of it in the government, because their feeling is that, hey, I want to keep my money and I'm going to do whatever the hell I want with my money. I'm not going to give it to the government, and then the government is going to decide for me what they want to, put it towards. And I might not agree with some of that stuff. And anyway, I want to have more money anyway, because that gives me more ability to do what I want, right? And so this is the core difference I want to try to like narrow it down to its most basic common denominator, is that conservative thinking is very individualistic. It's based on the idea that the individual needs to try and do as well as they can for themselves and, for their people, for their family, for their tribe, whatever, but especially for themselves individually. And if we all do that, then that's going to benefit all of us as a whole, that is the way forward. And there's certainly some truth to that. It's important, I want to say, that both conservative and progressive outlooks have elements of truth and reality to them, and both are valuable. And of course, the reality is that we need a mix of both, not strictly one or the other. Of course, I'm going to be biased, and I'm going to lean a little bit more towards the progressive side. But anyway, let me get back on track. So everything's about the individual. Do as good as you can for yourself, for your company, for your family, for whatever. And if everyone's doing that, that's going to benefit society at large. And what that does is it creates a very much like a competitive environment, right? And certainly you can see and argue, and there's tons of examples, right? This is capitalism, basically. You can see that competing certainly can make a good for everyone, right? Like, for example, let's say people are going to school to be doctors or medical researchers, and they have to grind and try their best to, be the best that they can and come out the greatest. And then they're competing for the best jobs in medical research or whatever. And then they are taken on, and that might yield certain cures for cancers, for example, or other things like that. And then that trickles down and benefits everybody at large, right? Okay, that's pretty believable. That's not hard to imagine. And then on the other side, the progressive outlook is more like, hey, we need to, instead of competing, we need to like cooperate and help bring each other up. It's more collective. Instead of individual, it's more collective. It's more like, and this is where you have like traces of socialism and stuff. It's being willing to recognize that we're not all like, there's a lot of divisions in, I don't know if you would say class or ability or, financial means, whatever. And so not everyone is starting at the same floor. And in theory, where the conservatives would say, oh, yes, everyone has the same opportunities, just pick yourself up by the bootstraps or whatever the saying is, and you can get it done. And that's true, you can get it done. But some people, their starting line is like 100 meters ahead. And some people's starting line is like, 3 feet dug underground, really far back and in the ground, because of their circumstances. And yeah, the idea is just that we help each other. Of course, the details of how you do that, it opens up possibilities for things being unfair or certain, aid being misused, which is also true. And yeah, so I guess that's the main point I wanted to say. Now, personally, yes, as I've already said, we need a balance of these things, but I am a little bit, probably a lot bit, leaning more towards the collective side. I think we can achieve, in many circumstances, we can achieve more with collective action where we help each other rather than where we compete with each other. And that produces, that's a really cutthroat way. In a way, that's nature's way. That's like evolution and survival of the fittest and all that, because it does produce stronger individuals, but it's always at someone's loss. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying you can always avert that, but it is very much, there's winners and there's losers. Even if at the end of the day, this individualistic method produces a good for everyone, at least in the moment, through competition, there are serious winners and losers. And I'm not saying that is always bad and it should never be like that. I'm just saying, consider that, think about it. So in some circumstances, competition is really good and is the way to go. But I think in other cases, more collectivist action and caring for each other and propping each other up is the way to go. In fact, I'm leaning more towards that second one, towards the progressive thing I just said. So yes, in a way, this did end up being sort of like a capitalism versus socialism thing that I just said. And, this is where I'll point out that for conservatives, everyone has their boogeyman, their like idea. And what I've noticed for conservatives, it's communism. That's the boogeyman. If you suggest anything about it, I'm not even sure that they know what that is or what it means, but it means something to them. And to conservatives, that it is basically hell on earth. It's basically, that's it. Once you reach that, you may as well be in hell and everything's over. Which is, I think that's a little extreme. I understand there's some historical, precedent for that, but that's why I say it's a boogeyman. It's like, I've been in so many conversations where that is just like, that is the end all for all of them. And for progressives, their boogeyman is something like fascism, which arguably is even harder to define because, well, whatever. I'm not even gonna attempt to define it, but I think that word is maybe thrown around a little too lightly, too easily. But yeah. Anyway, it's very easy to boil down to like, well, what you're doing, that's just fascism, and oh, you guys are just moving towards communism, and then if you reach one of these points, it's the whole country burns down, and it's just full anarchy, and everything's over. And it's like, well, I don't know about any of that, but anyway, okay. So that was a little bit of a rant, but let me just say something else. So, like, for example, I don't know exactly what we were discussing with my friend. I feel like it might have been a little bit around like foreign aid is like, for example, USAID, which got completely axed and well, I mean, not completely, but it got largely cut and removed, which is just a lot of different international aid that we were doing all over the world. What does that stand for? It's like a United States Agency of International Development, something like that. So I just wanted to say that, okay, could there be some fraud and waste and abuse? Of course there is some, and it needs to be, researched and found and dealt with. But the way that the current administration is handling cutting things back, it's like a brutish, sledgehammer, chainsaw style approach. It's not like a careful, researched removal. It's just assuming, hey, all this is all sucks. This is all bad and useless. Because the goal is not to listen carefully here. The goal is not to remove little bits and pieces and make things actually efficient. The goal is to just move towards the conservative agenda, which is collect less taxes, make things more individualistic. I want to keep my money. I'm going to do whatever the hell I want with my money that benefits me as an individual. And then hopefully that'll benefit society at large if we all do that. That's the whole point, okay? And so specifically on USAID, well, like what are the benefits of some of the things? What are the benefits of like helping combat the like AIDS and stuff in various places in Africa? Well, first of all, you could just say that there's a value in just doing good for good's sake, right? You don't even have to be religious, I think, to see value in that. I'm a secular person. But, okay, let's say that whatever we do, there needs to be something, we need to get something for everything we do. Because if you're just doing good for good's sake, that's like volunteering, that's altruism. You might not be getting anything back. But what if we always want to get something back? It's always tit for tat. We gain something from helping out there, okay? Even, so you could say that's a little selfish, or you could say that's smart. Okay. So what do we get? Well, if we help out there, it's kind of hard to quantify, but we are projecting a soft power. We are showing that we are willing to help and do good and basically donate some of our, resources to help people. That helps our image. That helps our, project soft power. I don't know how to word that any differently. Like that puts us in a positive light and is a credit on our resume, which is full of plenty of not good things as well, like stupid wars and stuff like that. So, so I guess that's the main thing I want to say. And then there's another thing I can get into, but I don't know how. I don't have time. I could talk for an hour about this, but I guess I'll try to briefly say, but like, what even is money, right? Like this is all a concern about money. It's all like, oh, we're spending money here versus not here. Money is, the longer you think about it, the more you kind of realize it's not real. It's, at least modernly, and the way that we're talking about it at scale, it is not real. It is an abstraction. Money is this game of debt and interest. And all money that is out there is owed back to someone. And I'm assuming that's the Federal Reserve. Well, I'm just using this as an example, like in the United States. I'm not speaking globally, but let's just say in the United States. All money is owed back to someone. I think that's the Fed, the Federal Reserve, and it's owed back with interest. So how could you possibly, if all the money that's out there were paid back to the Fed, where would the money for the interest come from? What does that even mean to the Fed to get that money? What would they do with all the money if it were to come back? This is a hypothetical. This obviously wouldn't happen, but like, what would they do? And what would they do with the interest? And realistically, they would just send it back out and try to continue this machine that is the economy, right? But again, this is a very abstract topic, but we talk about money like it's something that we can store or hoard or like physically move around, because in some ways it represents things that we can do that with, right? Like, okay, so to go back to like, what is money? Way back in the past, we would like trade and barter, and it was like, okay, well, I want to sell you these animal hides, and I want to buy some of your corn and other food. It's like, okay, well, how many of these animal pelts are worth the corn? And it was always difficult, although I would say the majority of the human history we bartered like that with goods that we need, with things that we need. Like, I need those hides for clothing so that I survive the winter and stuff, and you need the food because we all need food to survive. And so like eventually it's inconvenient. So then we started making money in various ways, which it was a more standardized unit of representing value, right? And it was some kind of coins. It was like gold, precious metals. At least when it's tied to something like gold, then it does have some kind of physical, literal component to it, which this is not an argument for or against the gold standard. Certainly not for, because there's lots of flaws with that. But at some point, nothing backs up the money we have now. It's just our faith in it, that everyone accepts it and everyone rolls with it. And you could say so everything is based on us, our most basic needs. Like, we all live and die. We all have a certain amount of time before our lives end and we die as an individual. And we all have certain base needs like shelter and food. For simplicity, let's just talk about it as food, because that's very simple. Like, we all have to eat, and it takes effort to procure and transport and make this food available. So that's like a very real thing we need. So let's say money represents food. Okay, yes, it does, but at large scale, at the scale of like states and countries and whatever, it starts to become like, okay, this aircraft carrier cost so many billions of dollars. Well, let's translate it into meals. Like, how many meals could we get instead of having an aircraft carrier? It doesn't really work out so well. It doesn't, like, I mean, yes, you could technically figure out how many meals, but like, it becomes sort of a meaningless comparison, because we're not, like, it's not actually tied to, again, the money isn't real. It's numbers in a computer. Technically, someone can go and add a zero to the end or remove a zero. I mean, that would kind of be a huge difference. But like, technically, it could be edited. And, the Fed kind of does that. The Fed kind of injects and removes supply of money, which of course changes how much every individual unit of that is worth. But it's not like, oh man, we gave 12 billion to Ukraine, and we're treating it like it's some item that we gave to them. That was, oh no, think of all the meals we gave them. But if we kept it here at home, then we could have all these meals that we would feed to people. We wouldn't have, so many people with their food insecure. Would we though? The food is still here. Nothing's changing with the food. You understand? The food is still here. We still have the ability, in theory, to feed most people that need to be fed. Probably all people. But we're all playing this game where this value is tied to this abstract, intangible thing, which is money in a computer. Yeah. So anyway, I don't really have a point with this rant. It's just, this is always in the back of my mind when we're thinking about how much money we're spending on this versus on that. At the end of the day, the people that you're arguing for might not spend that money how you want. And maybe you're on the side of just let me keep all my money and I'll spend it how I want. There's benefits to both ways, and kind of none of it is real. You know, in the scenario where everything is bad and we just need to survive, what we really need is food and shelter and the basic necessities. And our abstract money just becomes a really bad method for representing those things in times of real crisis. You know, like when things are really bad, you need food, although you need that when things are good as well. Like, you need food no matter what, or your survival is at risk. It doesn't matter how much money you have. If, say, there's a war and you just can't get the food, you can't eat the money. Even if it was paper money, I guess you could burn it for some warmth, but you can't eat the money. You can't do what you need with the money without the system in place where everyone assumes it's worth something. And then maybe you can trade it for meals, whatever. Anyway, I'm rambling now. I don't know if I even made a point with that last thing, but hopefully it got you thinking about at least something that really, you know, it's cliche to say, but in many ways, money is the root of all evil and the root of all our problems. Because what really matters is the resources that we have are finite and sometimes not finite, sometimes replenishable resources, but there's only so many of them and there's only so much time that they need to, you know, like for crops to grow and whatnot. That's what matters, is the things we really need to survive at a core. And it's not money. And a lot of our problems, most of our human problems, come from this manipulation of money, this monetary game that we play. So I've now wandered really far away from the initial topic, which is just the mentality of progressives versus conservatives. So you can disregard that last, 5 minutes or however long I've been talking about this. And but anyway, hopefully that got you something to think about. Thanks for listening to my silly rant. Farewell.